Joining us now at the map, the research director at the Institute for the Study of War and former U.S. Army intelligence officer, Jessica Lewis, who's an expert on ISIS. Jessica, you and I have talked about this before. Explain how bureaucratic the structure of ISIS is, how it almost has a corporate structure.
Yes, well, we were particularly able to tell earlier this summer when ISIS released its second annual report that ISIS does have the ability to document the attacks that are conducted by all of its local military organizations throughout its depth, as depicted by this map with the ISIS-controlled and operational areas designated in red. That controlling that campaign requires such a bureaucracy, and being able to affect the campaigns in Iraq and Syria in a synergistic way really does indicate that the organization has that kind of bureaucracy at its disposal.
It also is, for a terror group especially, very sophisticated in its use of videos and social media, primarily to try to recruit new fighters.
Yes, I would say that one of the more developed organizations within ISIS is its public relations arm. That they have been able to leverage social media, as you mentioned, also to be able to build a campaign of print media in many languages, especially in English, which means that they're messaging the Western world.
All right, we have you at the map. Given this corporate structure, the fact that it has leadership and deputies and regional leaders, what challenges and what opportunities would that present to the U.S. were we to go ahead on airstrikes on both sides of the Iraq-Syria border?
Yes. Well, I think the challenge that is primary is that there are many different regional campaigns that ISIS is conducting and that it is able to synchronize them. For example, in northern Iraq, ISIS is operating in a way that it can balance back and forth with how they are operating in northern Syria. If something starts to work against them in northern Iraq, they can surge in eastern Iraq or in northeastern Syria. And we have seen them do this over the course of the last few weeks. So one of the challenges is affecting ISIS throughout its depth at such a time that it actually disrupts their campaign planning and their flexibility. One of the opportunities that we also have, as you mentioned, is to affect ISIS on both sides of the Iraq-Syria border. It could potentially be an assumption of ISIS going in that the United States and international community is more likely to become engaged in Iraq than in Syria, and if that planning assumption ISIS were to fail, if they were to face airstrikes, for example, also in Syria, then that also presents a very significant opportunity.
Now, as it moves back and forth between this basically non-existent border between Iraq and Syria, were we to strike on one side or another, would targets become open? Would supply lines become open for us to hit?
I believe so, yes. Some of the most critical supply lines for ISIS cross the Jazeera Desert, but because they have control of the roads, they are most likely adhering to them. So it is likely that ISIS, with this bureaucracy, has repeatable processes, and the more repetition they have within their campaign, the easier it is to target it effectively. But I think one of the other points that we should consider is that there is also military terrain that is significant to ISIS. In Iraq and in Syria, ISIS is taking over bases, and those also present a potential target set.
We have less than a minute left. We hear a lot about the leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who has almost formed a cult of personality around himself. How hard would he be to track down, and how essential is he to ISIS? In other words, were we to hit him, would that kill ISIS, or would somebody else just replace him?
Well, I think that he is very significant to this group. He is actually the personified caliph leading this caliphate. However, as we look at this bureaucracy and we see that this is a very functional institution, the institutional leadership, I would say the regional commanders within the ISIS military especially, are the most critical targets to disrupt them.
Jessica, thank you. Thanks very much. We want to have you back to discuss this more.